Everything began in 1763, when Britain's costly 7 Years' War victory left crushing debts and new colonial taxes. The following year, the Sugar Act taxed colonial trade, merchants resenting distant lawmakers tightening their grip on commerce. By 1765, the Stamp Act provoked fury as colonists rejected Britain's right to tax without representation in Parliament. Chants of "no taxation without representation" soon filled Boston streets, defiance echoing boldly against Britain's armed authority. 2 years later, Townshend duties taxed everyday imports, turning glass, paper, and tea into bitter reminders of imperial control. In March 1770, the Boston Massacre left 5 colonists dead, inflaming anger and deepening distrust toward Britain's soldiers. Resistance spread further in 1772, as committees of correspondence carried defiant letters into every colonial town. December 1773 brought the Boston Tea Party, patriots destroying taxed tea and daring Britain with open defiance. In response, the Coercive Acts of 1774 punished Boston harshly, soldiers patrolling streets under harsh imperial law. That autumn, the First Continental Congress convened, colonial leaders pledging unity and preparing to resist Britain together. Throughout the years 1763 to 1774, every British law tightened control, while each protest added fuel to rebellion's fire. Families felt the strain, daily burdens of British taxes turning private struggles into seeds of broader resistance. Pamphlets spread radical ideas as writers urged liberty, declaring Britain's authority illegitimate and America's cause just. Even women resisted through homespun cloth, rejecting British imports and transforming household labor into political defiance. Merchants signed boycotts in solidarity, striking Britain's economy while strengthening unity among the colonies. Farmers too joined protests, anger spreading from city streets into rural fields, forging one common struggle against Britain. Meanwhile, British soldiers filled Boston streets, their presence a constant reminder that empire ruled through force. In response, colonial militias drilled quietly, farmers preparing themselves for the battles that would soon erupt. Fear grew in households, rumors spreading that Britain planned harsher measures to crush the defiant colonies. By late 1774, leaders sensed war was near, words had failed, and muskets would soon decide America's fate. In April 1775, tension finally burst at Lexington, nervous farmers gripping muskets as they faced Britain's disciplined redcoats. Moments later, shots erupted, the shot heard round the world, igniting open revolution along the roads to Concord. Driven back from Concord's bridge, British redcoats retreated under relentless militia fire, colonial defiance pushing them eastward. By June 1775, George Washington had taken command at Cambridge, uniting militias into a continental army under his leadership. Soon after, the Battle of Bunker Hill proved costly for Britain, colonial resistance fierce, stubborn, and unwilling to yield easily. In March 1776, cannon hauled from Ticonderoga forced Britain to evacuate Boston, ships fleeing the harbor in defeat. Meanwhile in Philadelphia, fierce debates raged among delegates, independence emerging as the only path left forward. In June, Jefferson drafted the Declaration of Independence, words destined to define America's cause for generations to come. On July 2, 1776, Congress solemnly approved independence, breaking ties with Britain in a historic vote. 2 days later, on July 4, the Declaration was proclaimed, America announcing its birth proudly to the world. But independence invited Britain's fury. That August, redcoats struck Long Island, forcing Washington's weary army into retreat. Through autumn 1776, Washington led desperate withdrawals across New York, preserving his army against overwhelming British might. Yet on December 26, Washington struck boldly, crossing the icy Delaware at dawn to surprise Hessians at Trenton. The stunning victory at Trenton revived morale, America's hopes reborn as the year closed on renewed confidence. Days later, Washington struck again at Princeton, turning retreat into momentum and lifting spirits across the colonies. Building on that momentum, early 1777 saw the Forage War, where scattered skirmishes harassed British columns and denied supplies. That winter at Morristown was harsh, Hunger and cold gnawed deeply, yet the army held together after bold victories. By late winter, British forces pulled back toward coastal strongholds, conceding New Jersey's interior to American patrols. Meanwhile, Congress reinforced Washington's command, urging states to provide fresh men and supplies to sustain the war. Across towns and farms, women spun cloth and gathered provisions, sustaining families and soldiers behind the lines. As spring 1777 arrived, steady drills and patrols restored order, preparing Washington's army for the coming campaign. By summer 1777, the Continental Army braced for the Northern Campaign, a looming struggle that could decide America's fate. In summer 1777, Britain launched its Grand Northern Campaign, Burgoyne marching from Canada with thousands to sever New England. His long column crawled through wilderness, supply lines stretched thin across rivers and forests, progress painfully slow. In August, Oriskany's brutal clash saw militia against loyalists and allies, both sides bloodied in savage combat. Soon after, New England militia struck at Bennington, capturing supplies and scattering Burgoyne's foragers in stunning victory. American resistance stiffened, slowing British progress, while morale inside Burgoyne's weary army began to falter badly. By September, exhausted troops neared Saratoga, their provisions dwindling and support far behind in hostile wilderness. At Freeman's Farm on September 19, fierce American resistance stalled Burgoyne's advance in a bloody, desperate battle. On October 7, at Bemis Heights, American counterattacks shattered British lines, forcing retreat under relentless fire. Surrounded and cut off, Burgoyne's trapped army found retreat impossible through thick woods and hostile rivers. On October 17, 1777, Burgoyne surrendered over 5,000 troops, his sword given in humiliation at Saratoga. The stunning victory electrified America, proving the Continental Army could defeat Britain's regulars in open battle. Across the Atlantic, news of Saratoga convinced France that alliance with America was not only possible but necessary. Yet that same winter, Washington's weary army limped into Valley Forge, lacking food, clothing, and shelter after campaigns. Through January 1778, hunger and disease swept the frozen encampment, snow piling against rough log huts. Still, Washington's calm leadership anchored morale, holding soldiers together despite cold, hunger, and despair. Farmers and civilians delivered scarce provisions, sustaining the starving encampment through the harshest weeks of winter. Meanwhile, in Paris, American envoys pressed France to recognize independence and join the revolutionary cause. On February 6, 1778, France signed treaties of alliance and commerce, formally committing itself to America's fight. That same month, Baron von Steuben arrived at Valley Forge, bringing discipline, drills, and European expertise. Day after day, he drilled ragged soldiers, shouting sharp commands as lines repeated precise maneuvers. Farmers turned soldiers transformed into a disciplined force, confidence growing with each practiced step. Washington and his officers inspected ranks proudly, skill and order replacing months of chaos. By spring 1778, soldiers emerged lean, hardened, and prepared for the renewed campaign ahead. Then news arrived of the French alliance, drums and cheers echoing across the camp in celebration. Valley Forge became a lasting symbol of sacrifice and rebirth, hardship forging America's army anew. As snow melted that spring, hope returned, strengthened by France's aid and the army's remarkable transformation. In 1778, France formally declared war on Britain, recognizing the United States as an independent nation at last. French fleets soon crossed the Atlantic, threatening Britain's naval supremacy and severing vital lifelines across the ocean. The arrival of French troops raised colonial hopes, promising strength to a cause long starved for allies. Meanwhile in European courts, Britain faced growing isolation as rivals sensed weakness and pressed their advantage. What began as a colonial uprising had become a global war, stretching Britain's armies and finances dangerously thin. That summer, French and British fleets clashed near American shores in the first major naval encounters of the war. By 1779, Spain entered the conflict, allying with France to strike Britain across the globe's distant frontiers. Spanish forces advanced along the Gulf Coast, seizing outposts and regaining long-lost territory from British rule. That same year, returning to America's south, Britain captured Savannah, making Georgia its stronghold for further campaigns. By late 1779, conflict spread into the Carolinas, where neighbors divided bitterly between patriots and loyalists in civil war. Across the Carolinas, that civil war deepened, militias clashing in relentless skirmishes that turned communities into battlefields. The struggle climaxed in May 1780 when Britain seized Charleston, capturing thousands of Continental troops in one blow. Charleston's fall marked America's darkest hour, the Southern cause collapsing as British control spread unchecked. Yet hope endured, guerrilla leaders like Francis Marion struck from swamps, harassing redcoats and keeping resistance alive. Meanwhile in Europe, the Dutch Republic joined the war, tightening the noose still further around Britain's empire. By late 1780, Britain fought enemies on every front, from Europe to India and the distant Caribbean seas. Yet in America that same year, defeats and desertions dimmed patriot hopes, casting despair deep across the army. Then in July, Rochambeau's French army landed at Newport, its disciplined ranks a welcome sign of real support. Through summer and autumn, Allied councils and joint drills slowly built trust, preparing for decisive campaigns to come. But in September, treason struck. Benedict Arnold's betrayal shocked the nation, nearly delivering West Point into British hands. Washington moved swiftly, tightening defenses and restoring morale, determined to hold the line after such a blow. Meanwhile at sea, French and Spanish squadrons battered Britain's trade, forcing the empire to stretch its navy dangerously thin. Constant naval pressure drained Britain's strength, leaving fewer ships to reinforce its struggling armies in America. By December 1780, Nathaniel Greene took command of the Southern Continental Army, reorganizing its shattered remnants for the brutal campaign ahead. Partisan fighters harassed British supply lines while Greene rebuilt his army, bleeding the enemy through stubborn resistance. As 1780 ended, despair gave way to resolve. America stood bruised but unbroken, allies beside them, ready for final victory. In 1781, Cornwallis entrenched at Yorktown, unaware that the Allies were quietly preparing a decisive blow. Washington seized the chance, secretly plotting with Rochambeau to strike the British stronghold by land and sea. Meanwhile, Admiral de Grasse sailed north with the French fleet, determined to block Cornwallis's escape from the Chesapeake. In early September 1781, the Battle of the Chesapeake secured French naval control, sealing Britain's fate at sea. British relief ships turned back, leaving Cornwallis isolated and trapped within Yorktown's defenses. Seizing the moment, Washington and Rochambeau led their armies south in a rapid, concealed march. By late September, thousands of French and American troops encircled Yorktown, tightening the noose around Cornwallis. Allied soldiers dug trenches under fire, inching closer each night as their siege lines advanced relentlessly. Soon heavy cannons roared, pounding British works with a relentless bombardment that shook the earth. In a daring night assault, French troops stormed one redoubt with bayonets, capturing the earthwork under fire. American troops seized another, Alexander Hamilton leading a swift assault that broke through British defenses. With outer redoubts fallen, the siege tightened further, Yorktown's defenses crumbling under Allied pressure. Supplies dwindled, soldiers exhausted, British morale collapsed as surrender seemed the only path left. On October 17, Cornwallis raised the white flag, formally asking Washington for terms of surrender. 2 days later, British redcoats marched out in defeat, stacking their arms before the waiting Allies. Drums beat triumphantly as Franco-American ranks celebrated the long-awaited victory at Yorktown. The world looked on in awe, Britain's empire humbled by the defiance of its former colonies. News crossed the Atlantic, stunning London while thrilling France and America's allies abroad. In Parliament, fierce debates erupted: continue the costly war, or finally seek peace with the colonies. Through it all, Washington thanked his weary soldiers, warning them the struggle was not yet fully over. Though Yorktown proved decisive, scattered fighting still lingered as diplomats across Europe began pressing toward negotiation. In Paris, Franklin, Adams, and Jay bargained fiercely with British envoys, determined to secure independence on paper. Finally, in September 1783, the Treaty of Paris was signed, formally confirming America's hard-won independence. New boundaries stretched westward to the Mississippi River, opening vast frontiers for the fragile young republic. Beyond America, revolutionary ideals echoed abroad, inspiring challenges to monarchies across Europe and distant lands. Thus the revolution ended, leaving a legacy of sacrifice, liberty, and the birth of a nation destined to endure.